Well, for better or for worse, we found out officially this week that E3 is coming back in 2021, albeit digitally, and with it, presentations from Capcom, Ubisoft, Take-Two, Warner Brothers, Xbox, and of course, Nintendo. I think this was more like a rumor when it was first announced, but E3 retweeted it and confirmed, and then Nintendo of America president Doug Bowser retweeted it and said,
"It's gonna be great to get the video game industry back together with our fans this June. We'll make the virtual format fun and engaging. Looking forward to seeing you all in June."
And I've got a couple of reasons why I think this could be a fan-flippin-tastic presentation from Nintendo this year. Let's talk about it. First up, a lot of you know that AJ and I have a weekly podcast where we discuss Nintendo news, Q&A, and the comments on our videos. Like any comments that you leave on this video, maybe we'll talk about them there. And I already know, based on mine and AJ's conversation about me making this video today, that podcast this week is going to be wonderfully divisive. So, feel free to take sides however you so choose, but you should definitely go ahead and subscribe to the Directly to You YouTube channel or find it on podcast services before it drops this Saturday, because I'm very curious how that conversation is going to go, so I would have to imagine that you are as well. But let's get into it. The main question we're trying to answer today is, will Nintendo go all out for E3 2021? And I guess subsequently, can we even know that answer yet? And before I even say anything, I'm very curious on what your thoughts are. So go ahead and leave those down in the comments. And like I said, we'll take some of those and talk about them on our podcast this weekend. Of course, some of that is semantics, because on one hand, yes, of course Nintendo is going all out because they're spending tons of money on marketing and every promotional opportunity is going all out. Or on the other side, no, they're not going all out because they're not telling us every single game that's coming out. They haven't told us about Metroid Prime 5 yet. So how could you be going all out if you don't tell us about Metroid Prime 5? So, it depends how you define that question. But basically what I'm asking is, does Nintendo have big ambitions for this presentation as compared maybe to other ones for the excitement for Nintendo fans and so on? I think it's important to say that last year was obviously off, and we'll talk about the E3 portion of that at some point, but just in general, it was just an off year for everyone, Nintendo included. Sales-wise, the Switch did phenomenally, and there were a ton of releases, including one of the top 2 best-selling Switch titles of all time, Animal Crossing: New Horizons. But otherwise, whether games had to be delayed out a year or that was always the timeline that was expected, there were a lot of B and C tier titles. The holiday season consisted of good to great ports and one Breath of the Wild spin-off that I really enjoyed, but not the strongest. And that's actually one of the first factors that comes into play. And obviously, outside of observations about the past, the speculations that I make in this video are speculations. So I'm trying my best not to raise my expectations and certainly don't want to raise yours, but I am interested in pointing out what's possible and what could be really exciting. So in mid-March, Takashi Mochizuki, who has been all over the Nintendo news and rumor sphere over the past couple months, wrote an article for Bloomberg entitled "Nintendo Targets a Record Year in Switch Game Sales." I linked it in the description for you to read the whole thing yourself, but aside from talking here about the rumored Switch Pro, as he's been a frontrunner for those conversations, he talks about expectations for Switch software sales to hit record highs for Nintendo for the fiscal year 2022, which is April 2021 until March 2022. From 205 million game sales to 250 million game sales, which is a lot more game sales. Of course, a lot of Nintendo titles are evergreen, so some of those will be back catalog that just keeps on selling. But he quotes Serkan Toto, who wrote in another article, "Nintendo will need to start the next fiscal year without Animal Crossing and the pandemic, but that will be offset by a much stronger blockbuster software lineup and new hardware." Since none of that's official, I don't want to use that quote as proof, but rather as a launch pad for, our conversation here. I think whether or not Nintendo's E3 presentation is any good is predicated on a couple of factors. Number one, is it paced well? We can't comment on that now, but they're pretty good about that lately, so I just assume yes, but who even knows? Number two, how many announcements are there? Also, can't really know, but I'll touch on that in a bit. And number three, what's the variety, quality, and surprise of the announcements? And to be honest, the pacing is also pretty dependent on this. And I think this is where we have the best info already. Let's talk about it and try to get into Nintendo's noggin. And to begin, let's look at the February Direct of 2021. Personally, I thought it was a pretty good Direct, but I know opinions vary on that front. But subjectivity aside, I think the exact content that was in there is pretty poignant, specifically in terms of dates. Leading up to that Direct, Nintendo kept reiterating the fact that this is only going to have games for the first half of 2021, and that's it. And if you think otherwise, you're fired. Or something. But then, of course, although most of the games that ended up being the case for, like Mario Golf Super Rush and Miitopia, there were a couple that fell barely outside of that, like Skyward Sword HD in July or No More Heroes 3 in August. But the two that are most interesting to me are Project Square Tactics and Splatoon 3, both coming out in 2022. And I feel like No More Heroes 3 had to be mentioned because if it's coming out in August, it's sort of an elephant in the room type situation. And Project Hammer Dachshund had to be talked about because there was a demo coming out, so they wanted to get that news out as quick as possible. But Splatoon 3 being announced there for 2022 when they made such a big deal about only early 2021 games could speak very well to what that means for E3. I'm sure in June they'll lead up to the presentation saying that they're only going to have games for the second half of 2021 and that's it. And even if I don't believe them, it's possible that they mostly do. But the Splatoon 3 announcement, even if it's not a big deal to you, it's a big deal to Nintendo. There's only been 2 Splatoon games so far and they've been in the top 10 bestsellers on both of their respective platforms. So that franchise is becoming very powerful for Nintendo, meaning if they were scrounging for an E3 announcement, they could have easily stuck to their first half of 2021 rule and held Splatoon 3 back. But they didn't. So that, coupled with the other aspect of the Direct, to me means that E3 is going to be really strong. The other aspect being that outside of Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl and the 2 late summer games I talked about before, we don't know anything about Nintendo's holiday season. So anything they announce at all will be a big surprise, and that's a big part of a good presentation. And obviously to them, there are surprises other than Splatoon 3, because again, they could have held that back. And maybe their biggest announcement is Breath of the Wild 2. Even then, although the game itself, its existence is a known quantity, pretty much all of its content would be a surprise. So essentially, we have months of game releases unaccounted for, which has not happened in a year of the Nintendo Switch by the time we get to E3 ever. And I personally am confident that there's at least one game announcement that's as big a reveal as Splatoon 3, if not bigger. So I'm not going to outline everything that I think will be at the E3 Direct, because we'll probably do some actual specific predictions closer to that date, but I'll line some broad things up that I think make the most sense to work together in consort. For one thing, there are plenty of games that continue to elude us, and we know that they're going to be talked about in 2021. Shin Megami Tensei 5, Bayonetta 3, Breath of the Wild 2, all of these have been confirmed in some way that they will be talked about in 2021, and what better place than E3. And again, there's all sorts of surprises that we'll save for prediction videos later down the road, but furthermore, the ever-present topic of Nintendo anniversaries. And this is now where we'll talk about E3 2020, or the lack thereof. Because if we know anything about that E3, it's that Mario was supposed to be a big feature there. That's where they were going to roll out the whole Mario 35th anniversary thing. So the obvious conclusion we can come to here is E3 the time to really blow out the Zelda 35th anniversary, or the Metroid 35th anniversary, or Donkey Kong 40th anniversary? And honestly, I think so, but probably only one of those at a time, meaning Zelda. I do definitely think that at least Metroid is going to get something this year. Maybe not Donkey Kong, and maybe not some of the other ones, but Metroid seems like a very likely candidate of something, but I think it'll be later in the year. Just a couple of weeks ago, before we even knew Nintendo was going to be at E3, AJ and I were talking on the podcast about the fact that we were pretty sure that that would be around the time that they'd start setting up the Zelda 35th stuff. The question I have is, how does that affect pacing? Because obviously for the Mario 35th stuff, we got that in its own Direct in September, but if that was going to be part of the E3 Direct, how would that have worked together with all the other announcements they had? And honestly, my guess is that they would have taken that full Mario Anniversary Direct and put it at the end of the E3 Direct, but, you know, maybe shortened up a little bit. It was 16 16 minutes long, and that's not even as long as they spent talking about Smash Bros. In the 2018 E3 Direct. So I could seriously see them doing that with the Zelda one, just finish it off with a whole bunch of Zelda stuff at once. But one big difference to me is the excitement that I think a lot of people would feel around that as part of a Direct. The Mario one might have been a bit of a hard sell as a part of a bigger product because a lot of those games were ports and were kind of known quantities of some sort. We knew the 3D All-Stars games individually, even if we didn't fully know that they were confirmed as being together. 3D World is a known quantity. Mario Kart Live was definitely a surprise, but still, you know, Mario Kart, I guess. And just spin-offs in general for Mario aren't that unusual. On the flip side, Zelda spin-offs are kind of few and far between. Basically, there's 3D Zelda, there's 2D Zelda, Hyrule Warriors now, Cadence of Hyrule, Link's crossbow training, and a couple other things, but that's about it. Meaning that if they do anything outside of the norm for Zelda, then it'll actually be really exciting and fresh. And of course, Zelda 35th anniversary or not, I think there's no way we're getting through this whole Direct without talking about Breath of the Wild 2. Another small thing I've been wondering about E3 and Nintendo and whether or not it'll be the best experience it can be is, are things like the tree houses still gonna be there? And honestly, after getting digital ones last year for Paper Mario, Pikmin 3, and Age of Calamity, I think it's pretty likely. I really think the tree houses are a big part of what makes the Nintendo experience feel great, because a lot of those games we get to see for the first time, but then get to experience just a little bit more through the tree houses. So I wouldn't be surprised if they did come back, but I really hope that they do. And since everything is digital this year, that should free up a decent amount of budget for Nintendo to, as Doug Bowser says, make the virtual format fun and engaging. I don't know exactly what that means, but I'd be curious on what your thoughts are in the comments. And speaking of comments, here's one from Oh So Animated that left a comment on AJ's video about third parties working with Nintendo first party properties, and this suggestion itself could be a great set of E3 announcement surprises. The comment reads, "First, for me personally, I would love to see more collaborations between Nintendo IPs other than Smash or Mario Kart. I think some sort of RPG game where you can travel from characters' universes to help with some sort of crisis, and after the crisis is resolved, they become a member of your party would be great. I want to say that Bandai Namco combined with one of Nintendo's first-party studios would be ideal. Also, I'd love to see Kirby get an open world game of some sort. Doesn't have to be a particular studio, but I think maybe an indie studio would do this type of game some justice if provided more resources to help develop the game. I really could talk about this in more detail, but I'll leave it at that." And to both of those ideas, I am 100% with you. Nintendo doesn't have that many turn-based RPGs, for example. They have Golden Sun, which is the best turn-based RPG there is, but they're not really using it. And this would be a great way, like Smash, to be able to bring some of these RPGs together that some are more known, some are less known, and they could kind of bring them back to the forefront all at once. I'm here for it. Also, Kirby Open World, yep, said it in a video before and I'll say it again. It would be great, I guess. But that's what I think. What do you think? Do you think Nintendo's E3 presentation is gonna be just the best biggity bong, the best one ever has been, or not good? Let me know all that and more in the comment section down below, and we'll take some of those comments, talk about them on our podcast this weekend, and the other ones we'll just read, even if we don't talk about them on our podcast, because I read all the comments. It's fun. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to fanatixfour for more content like this every Tuesday and Thursday from me and AJ at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And that's about it for me. See you next week. Pizza blessings.